I never thought much about working the graveyard shift at a gas station on the edge of nowhere. It's just another job, right? A paycheck to help me scrape by while I try to finish my studies. But something about those long, lonely nights has a way of getting under your skin, especially when you're out here in the middle of nowhere. The darkness seems thicker, the silence more oppressive, and there's always this underlying feeling that you're not quite alone, even when the station is empty. Fluorescent lights above me hum persistently, flickering now and then like they're trying to speak some secret language only the night can understand. Outside, the wind howls across the desolate highway, carrying with it the chill of isolation. The nearest town is miles away, and the only other signs of life are the occasional headlights that cut through the darkness before disappearing into the void again. Every night, I go through the same routine. I fill up the coffee pots, restock the shelves, and try to keep myself busy. But there's something unsettling about the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. It's when the world feels most abandoned. I find myself battling an inexplicable sense of dread that grows stronger with each passing minute. I remember the first night I saw something I couldn't explain. It was around 2 a.m., and the security camera monitor was glitching, its screen filled with static. At first, I thought it was a technical issue. This place is old, and the equipment is just as ancient. But then the screen flickered back to life, revealing an image that made my heart skip a beat. There was a figure standing by the gas pumps, perfectly still, illuminated by the harsh overhead lights. He or it was staring directly at the camera. The face was obscured, shrouded in shadow, but I felt an unsettling chill creep up my spine. My first thought was that it was some prankster trying to mess with me. But there was something off about the whole scene, something that didn't feel quite right. I shook my head, trying to shake off the feeling that had settled like a stone in my gut. I blinked, and just like that, the screen filled with static again. When it cleared, the figure was gone. I exhaled, convincing myself it was a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination fueled by the fatigue of these long nights. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. I could still feel the weight of eyes watching me from somewhere out there in the dark. And that's when the door chimed. A soft jingle that seemed to echo far too loudly in the oppressive silence of the station. I turned, half expecting to see some ordinary late-night traveler. What I saw instead was anything but ordinary. A man stepped inside, his presence filling the small space with a suffocating tension. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in clothes that seemed a relic from another time, worn and tattered, as if he'd walked through the ages to get here. His skin was pale, almost ghostly, and his eyes were hollow, sunken, and devoid of any warmth or recognition. The man moved silently down the aisles, gliding rather than walking, his footsteps soundless against the linoleum floor. As he drew closer, I could feel a chill emanating from him, an unnatural cold that seemed to seep into my bones. I tried to force a smile, my mouth dry as sandpaper. Late night, I managed to croak, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. Instead, he placed a single bottle of water on the counter with a deliberate slowness that set my nerves on edge. I rang up the purchase, each beep of the register sounding absurdly loud in the quiet room. That's when I heard it, a whisper so close it felt like someone was breathing right against my ear. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was soft, indistinct, but it held an unsettling tone that sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced up, expecting to see the man speaking, but his lips hadn't moved. The man paid and turned to leave, disappearing into the night just as silently as he'd arrived. I watched him go, my eyes glued to the glass door until it swung shut behind him. I stood there, the eerie silence pressing in around me, the whisper still echoing in my mind. It was only when I looked at the security monitor again that my breath caught in my throat. The man was gone from the screen, vanished as if he'd never existed. I replayed the footage over and over, but it was the same every time. One moment he was there, and the next, nothing. I felt a creeping unease settle in the pit of my stomach, the rational part of my mind scrambling for explanations that didn't come. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something I couldn't quite put into words. The world felt different. shadows deeper and more menacing. And I was left with the unsettling suspicion that this was only the beginning of a nightmarish reality I wasn't prepared to face. The night had turned more sinister after the strange encounter with the mysterious man. As the hours dragged on, a sense of unease gripped me tightly, refusing to let go. It was as if the air itself had grown thick with tension, palpable sense of something unseen lurking just beyond the edge of the gas station's flickering lights. The store felt emptier than ever, the silence punctuated only by the low hum of the refrigerators and the occasional creak of the old building settling into itself. I tried to busy myself with mundane tasks, sweeping the floor, stocking the shelves, but my mind kept returning to the man and the chilling whisper that had seemed to come from nowhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, inherently wrong. I decided to step outside for a breath of fresh air, hoping the cool night breeze might help clear my head. The moment I opened the door, a gust of wind swept past me, carrying with it a whispering sound that seemed to echo all around. It was like the night itself was alive, speaking in a language only the shadows understood. The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. The headlights of passing cars flashed by occasionally, illuminating the station for a brief moment, before plunging it back into shadow. I stood there, feeling small and insignificant beneath the vast expanse of the starlit sky. Then, in the distance, I saw it, faint, flickering light. At first, I thought it might be another vehicle approaching, but as it drew nearer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was a lantern, its warm glow swaying gently as it moved toward the station, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out who or what was holding it. The light drew closer, revealing a figure cloaked in shadow, their face obscured by the lantern's glare. They moved with a deliberate slowness, as if they were in no hurry to reach their destination. My heart raced as the figure finally stepped into the light, revealing an elderly woman. Her face was lined with age, her eyes sharp and piercing beneath the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. She seemed out of place, like a relic from another time. There was something unsettling about her, an air of mystery that clung to her like a shroud. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Can I help you?" The woman stopped, her gaze locking onto mine. Her eyes seemed to bore into me, seeing right through the facade of normalcy I tried to maintain. She didn't answer immediately, as if weighing her response. "I was passing by," she finally said, her voice low and melodic, an edge of something I couldn't quite place. "Thought I'd see if there's anyone here brave enough to work the night shift in a place like this." I forced a chuckle, though it sounded hollow even to my ears. "Yeah, well, it's not as exciting as it seems." She stepped closer, the lantern casting a circle of light around us that felt both comforting and confining. "You'd be surprised," she said, her gaze never wavering. "There are things in the night that only reveal themselves to those who dare to look." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the question died on my lips. There was a gravity to her presence, a sense that she knew more than she was letting on. "Be careful, young man," she continued, her tone shifting to one of warning. "The night has a way of revealing truths we might not be ready to face." With that, she turned and walked away, the lantern's light growing dimmer as she retreated into the darkness. I watched her go, feeling as if I'd been caught in a surreal dream, a feeling that only deepened when I realized I hadn't heard her footsteps at all. I returned inside, my mind buzzing with questions and uncertainties. Her words echoed in my mind, a cryptic warning that seemed to fit all too well with the night's strange events. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far beyond my understanding. Hours passed, yet time felt distorted. Minutes stretched into eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the oppressive silence. As I went about my tasks, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, an intangible presence lurking just out of sight. Every creak of the building, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. Then, just as the clock neared 3 a.m., a sudden noise shattered the stillness. A loud crash from the back of the store, like something heavy being knocked over. My heart leaped into my throat, and I froze, fear rooting me to the spot. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the flashlight from behind the counter and headed towards the noise. My hands were shaking, the beam of light dancing erratically as I made my way through the aisles. The shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, taking on shapes that played tricks on my eyes. As I approached the storage area, the air grew colder, an inexplicable chill that raised goosebumps on my skin. I hesitated at the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But something compelled me to push forward, to uncover whatever was lurking in the darkness. I swung the door open, my flashlight revealing a chaotic scene. A stack of boxes toppled over, their contents spilled across the floor. But it wasn't just the mess that made my blood run cold. Scrawled across the wall, in what appeared to be a black, tar-like substance, was a message. The night, tease all. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, dripping slowly down the wall. I backed away, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. The room felt alive, the air charged with an unseen force that seemed to press in from all sides. I stumbled back into the main area of the station, my thoughts a whirlwind of terror. What had I gotten myself into? Was this some elaborate prank, or was there something truly sinister at work here? Just then, the lights flickered violently, plunging the station into darkness. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my heart, echoing loudly in my ears. I stood there engulfed in shadow, feeling as though the very night itself was closing in around me. And in that suffocating darkness, I heard it. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You cannot hide from the truth. The words were a sinister promise, chilling me to my core. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if I were standing on the precipice of something far beyond my control. Whatever was happening, it was only just beginning, and I was trapped in the center of it all. As the whisper echoed through the darkness, I felt a cold sweat bead on my forehead. My flashlight flickered, beam weak and unreliable, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. I clung to the light as if it were my only lifeline, the darkness pressing in around me like a living thing. I knew I had to move, get out of the suffocating silence and into the open air, but my legs felt heavy, rooted to the spot by an invisible force. The gas station felt like a tomb, and I was trapped inside it, with the night pressing against the glass walls as if trying to break in. Finally, summoning what little courage I had left, I forced myself to step forward, my footfalls echoing loudly in the oppressive quiet. Each step felt like a monumental effort, as if I were wading through molasses. The walls seemed to close in on me, the darkness thickening with each passing second. I made my way to the front of the store, where the security monitor was mounted on the wall. The screen flickered with static, distorted images creating a nightmarish kaleidoscope of shadows and light. I stared at it, half expecting the mysterious figure from earlier to reappear. Instead, the screen went dark, a low buzzing filling the air. Then, the image returned, but it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was as if the camera was showing another world, a twisted reflection of reality where the gas station lay in ruins, its windows shattered and walls crumbling. Shadows slithered across the ground like living creatures, their forms shifting and writhing in a grotesque dance. My heart hammered in my chest, a wild rhythm that matched the rising panic in my mind. Was this some kind of sick joke, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and fear? Or was I peering into something far darker, a glimpse into a world I wasn't meant to see? And then, amidst the chaos on the screen, I saw him, the same gaunt figure from before. He stood at the edge of the frame, his face a mask of shadow and malice. His eyes met mine through the lens, and a chill raced down my spine as a malevolent smile curled his lips. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight in my haste. My thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and confusion, the surreal nature of the night warping my sense of reality. The screen flickered again, the image distorting before cutting out entirely, leaving nothing but a black void. Desperation clawed at me, and I found myself wishing for some kind of explanation, any logical reason for the madness unfolding around me. But the night offered no answers, only more questions that weighed heavy on my mind. In that moment of helplessness, I remembered something. The storage room in the back, where the gas station kept its old records. If there was any clue to be found, it would be there. hidden among the forgotten files and dusty shelves. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own as I made my way to the back of the store. My footsteps echoed ominously, the sound swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere that clung to every corner. The air was thick, each breath a laborious effort that left me feeling lightheaded and on edge. I reached the storage room, the door creaking open with a reluctant groan. The space beyond was a mess of boxes and papers, the remnants of the gas station's long history scattered haphazardly across the floor. I shone my flashlight over the room, its feeble glow revealing cobwebs that draped like ghostly veils from the ceiling. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the shelves for anything that might offer a clue. My heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread, the weight of the night pressing heavily on my shoulders. I rifled through the stacks of dusty files, my hands shaking as I searched for answers. It was then that I found it. Faded newspaper clipping tucked between two yellowing folders. The headline leapt out at me, the words sending a chill down my spine. Tragedy strikes local gas station. Fatal accident claims 2 lives. The article detailed a horrific accident that had occurred years ago, right here at the station. A delivery truck had lost control, slamming into the building and causing a devastating explosion that had claimed the lives of 2 employees working the night shift. The driver had been a young man, barely out of his teens, who had lost his life in the crash. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I read the names of the victims. They were eerily familiar, names I'd seen etched on a plaque hanging in the break room, a memorial to those who had lost their lives in service. And the driver's name? It was one I recognized all too well. It was mine. My blood ran cold as the realization sank in, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with terrifying clarity. The whispers, the shadows, the strange occurrences, they were all tied to this place, this moment in time where the past and present converged in a horrifying twist of fate. Flashlight flickered again, casting erratic shadows that seemed to reach for me, and a low, mocking laugh echoed through the room, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I staggered back, the newspaper clipping slipping from my grasp and fluttering to the floor. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the impossible truth that had been laid bare before me. And then, in that moment of revelation, vision washed over me, vivid and unrelenting. I saw the accident play out before my eyes, the screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the roar of flames consuming everything in their path. I saw the faces of the victims, twisted in fear and pain, their eyes pleading for salvation that would never come. I stumbled back, clutching my head as the vision assaulted my senses. The weight of my guilt and regret threatened to crush me, a suffocating burden that left me gasping for air. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, haunted by the sins of the past that had come back to claim their due. But in the midst of the chaos, a voice cut through the haze, a whisper that was both familiar and foreign, filled with an eerie calm that belied the horrors unfolding around me. "Do you see now?" it asked. The words a chilling reminder of the truth I had long tried to forget. The past never truly leaves us. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of my own conscience, the darkness closing in as I grappled with the realization that there was no escape, no redemption for the mistakes I had made. The world around me spun in a dizzying blur, shadows closing in with an insidious intent. I was lost, adrift in a sea of despair, the past wrapping tendrils around my soul, dragging me deeper into the abyss. And in that moment of utter darkness, I understood the chilling truth that the night sees all, and its gaze is merciless. I found myself slumped against the cold, unforgiving wall of the storage room, my mind reeling from the vision that had overtaken me. The revelation of my past sins weighed heavily on my conscience, a relentless force pressing down on me until I felt as if I might suffocate beneath its burden. My breaths came in ragged gasps, each one more desperate than the last, as I fought to regain some semblance of control. The shadows around me seemed to pulse with a life of their own, mocking whispers echoing in the darkness, as if the very walls of the gas station were alive with malevolent intent. "Do you see now?" Voice came again, chilling and familiar, as if it were an echo of my own guilt manifesting itself in the gloom. The The truth is undeniable. I couldn't deny it any longer. Past had caught up with me, clawing its way back from the depths of my memory to claim its due. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, haunted by the specters of my own mistakes. I forced myself to stand, the weight of my guilt heavy on my shoulders. The air was thick with an oppressive sense of dread, the darkness around me impenetrable, save for the feeble beam of my flashlight. I knew I had to move, find a way out of this waking nightmare. But every instinct screamed at me to turn back, flee from the truth that awaited me in the shadows. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest as I pushed the door open and stepped back into the main area of the gas station. The lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and writhe with a life of their own. I stood there, feeling the oppressive weight of the night pressing down on me from all sides. The air was charged with an electric tension, a sense that something terrible was about to happen. And then, as if on cue, the lights went out completely, plunging the station into total darkness. I was alone in the void, my heartbeat the only sound in the suffocating silence. My flashlight sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the inky blackness. Panic clawed at my throat, my breaths coming in shallow, frantic gasps as I tried to orient myself in the dark. It was then that I heard it, a low, menacing growl that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the station. The sound was a visceral thing, primal and feral, echoing with a deep, guttural resonance that sent shivers down my spine. My heart raced as I turned towards the source of the sound, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. The growl grew louder, closer, filling the air with an oppressive sense of dread. It was as if the shadows themselves had taken form, coalescing into some monstrous entity that lurked just beyond the edge of my perception. And then, in the midst of the blackness, I saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows, their forms indistinct and shifting, like wraiths born of the night itself. They moved with an unsettling grace, their presence a tangible thing that seemed to warp the air around them. My heart leapt into my throat, primal fear seizing me as the figures drew closer. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, piercing through the darkness with a predatory intensity, sent chills racing down my spine. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper, but the figures offered no answer. Instead, they closed in, surrounding me in a circle of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. As they drew nearer, I could feel the air grow colder, a bone-chilling frost that seeped into my very bones. My mind raced, frantic whirlwind of terror and confusion as I grappled with the impossible reality before me. It was then that I had a flash of memory, a vivid, jarring recollection of the accident that had haunted my nightmares for so long. The sound of screeching tires, the deafening roar of the explosion, flames consuming everything in their path. And in the midst of it all, faces of the victims, their eyes filled with accusation and pain. Figures pressed in closer, their presence a suffocating weight, threatened to crush me beneath its relentless force. I stumbled back, my mind teetering on the edge of madness as the weight of my guilt threatened to overwhelm me. But then, in the midst of the chaos, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me, a realization that the shadows were not here to harm me, but to force me to confront the truth I had long tried to bury. With a surge of determination, I faced the shadows head-on, my voice trembling but resolute as I spoke into the darkness. "I see now," said, the words an admission of my own culpability, my own complicity in the tragedy that had unfolded so long ago. "I know what I did, and I accept the responsibility." The shadows seemed to waver at my words, their forms flickering as if caught in a tempest of conflicting emotions. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of connection, an understanding that transcended the boundaries of life and death, guilt and redemption. But just as quickly as it had come, the moment was shattered by a blinding flash of light. My flashlight flickered back to life, casting its beam across the room and revealing the true nature of the shadows that had haunted me. They were not the specters of my guilt, ordinary objects, boxes and shelves cast in stark relief by the erratic play of light and shadow. Figures were gone, dissipated like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only the echo of their presence in the still air. I stood there, shaken but resolute, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and relief. The night seemed to hold its breath, the oppressive atmosphere giving way to a tentative calm that settled over the station like a shroud. I turned my attention back to the storage room, my gaze falling on the scattered papers and the newspaper clipping that lay at my feet. It was a tangible reminder of the past, a symbol of the truth I had finally confronted and the guilt I had chosen to accept. As I bent down to retrieve the clipping, a wave of déjà vu washed over me, a feeling of familiarity that tugged at the edges of my consciousness. It was as if I had been here before, standing at the crossroads of past and present, faced with a choice that would define the course of my future. The memory of the accident played out once more in my mind, vivid and unrelenting. Flames, the screams, the faces of the victims etched into my memory with painful clarity. And in the midst of it all, the realization that I had tried so hard to suppress. The knowledge that I had been the one behind the wheel that fateful night. A sense of peace settled over me, mingling with the lingering fear and regret still clung to my heart. It was a fragile equilibrium, a delicate balance between the shadows of the past and the light of acceptance that offered a glimmer of hope. With a deep breath, I rose to my feet, clutching the newspaper clipping in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The night was far from over, and the journey ahead was uncertain, but I knew that I could no longer hide from the truth. As I made my way back to the main area of the gas station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was a persistent sensation, prickle of awareness that danced along the edge of my senses, a reminder that the past was never truly far behind. The lights flickered once more, casting long shadows across the room that seemed to shift and writhe with a life of their own. But this time, I faced them with a newfound resolve, a determination to see the night through to its end, and to confront whatever lay ahead. And as I stepped forward, the echoes of the past whispered in the darkness, haunting refrain that echoed in my mind. The night sees all, and its gaze is merciless. As I stepped back into the main area of the gas station, a sense of disquiet settled over me. The silence was palpable, kind of silence that felt alive, as if it were listening and waiting for something. The oppressive weight of the night seemed to hang in the air, clinging to my skin like a cold mist. The lights continued to flicker overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. I moved cautiously, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement, any indication that the events of the night were not just figments of my imagination. I made my way to the counter, my footsteps echoing in the eerie stillness. As I approached, something caught my eye. A piece of paper, folded neatly and placed conspicuously on the countertop. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly. Unfolding the paper, I was met with a message written in an elegant, flowing script. The past never truly leaves us. Be vigilant. The words sent a shiver down my spine, the ink seeming to pulse with a life of its own as I stared at the page. Beneath the message was a symbol, intricately drawn and hauntingly familiar. It was the same symbol I had seen on the monitor earlier, the runes that had danced in the shadows and filled me with dread. The weight of the message pressed down on me, the implications of those words settling like lead in my stomach. What did it mean? Who had left it here? And what was their purpose? As I pondered the mystery, a faint rustling caught my attention. My gaze snapped up, scanning the room with a renewed sense of urgency. The shadows seemed to shift in response, a subtle movement that set my nerves on edge. Then I saw it, a figure standing just outside the glass doors, silhouetted against the dim glow of the streetlight. It was the same gaunt man from before, his presence as unsettling as ever. He stood there, motionless and watchful, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Fear clawed at my insides, my instincts screaming at me to run, to flee from this nightmare that refused to end. Something held me in place. Curiosity mingled with terror, compelling me to face the apparition that had haunted me throughout the night. I approached the glass cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of impending doom. The man remained still, his expression unreadable, a ghostly figure against the backdrop of the night. I reached the door and hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Part of me knew that this was a moment of reckoning, confrontation that I couldn't avoid. Summoning all the courage I could muster, I opened the door and stepped outside. The air was crisp and biting, a chill that cut through the remnants of my fear. The man stood a few feet away, his presence almost tangible in the darkness. His eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. A knowing look, as if he could see into the very depths of my soul. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "You know who I am," he said, his voice a low, resonant whisper that seemed to echo in the night air. "I am the consequence of your actions, the shadow that follows you wherever you go." His words were a knife twisting in my gut, truth of them undeniable. I had spent so long running from my past, trying to bury the mistakes I had made, but they had never truly left me. They lingered in the shadows, waiting for the moment to resurface and claim their due. "You can't escape what you've done," man continued, his gaze unwavering. "The past is a part of you, woven into the fabric of your being. You must face it if you ever hope to find peace." A storm of emotions raged within me, fear, guilt, regret, but beneath it all was a flicker of understanding, a realization that the man was right. I couldn't keep running from the ghosts of my past. I had to confront them, to accept the responsibility for the choices I had made. "How do I make amends?" they asked, questions spilling from my lips in a moment of vulnerability. "How do I move forward?" The man's expression softened, the malice in his eyes giving way to something else, compassion perhaps, or a semblance of understanding. "Acceptance," he said simply. "Acceptance and vigilance. Learn from your mistakes and ensure they are never repeated." With those words, he turned away, his figure dissolving into the shadows as if he had never been there at all. I was left standing in the cold, the weight of the encounter settling heavily on my shoulders. I stood there for a long moment, the night stretching on around me, the world silent save for the distant hum of passing traffic. The realization of what had transpired washed over me like a tidal wave, a cathartic release that left me breathless. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I returned to the gas station, my mind a whirl of thoughts and revelations. The interior was as it had been before, the lights steady and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, as if the building itself had sighed in relief. But as I gathered my belongings to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that lingered in the back of my mind, a nagging suspicion that this was only the beginning, that the shadows of the past would continue to watch and wait, ready to rise again should I falter. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape, a new day dawning with the promise of redemption and renewal. But as I stepped out into the morning air, the enigmatic message echoed in my thoughts, a reminder of the night's chilling encounter. The past never truly leaves us. Be vigilant. And as I walked away from the gas station, the shadows of the night behind me, I understood my journey was far from over. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with the specters of my own making, but I was determined to face it with eyes wide open and a heart unburdened by fear. For in the end, the night may see all, but it is only through the light of acceptance that we find our way forward, vigilant and unyielding against the shadows would seek to claim us. I remember that night as if it were yesterday. The gas station sat on the edge of town, its lonely flickering lights casting long shadows across the empty asphalt. I had only been working the night shift for a few months, but even then, something felt off about the place. Maybe it was the way the wind howled through the open fields, or the way the trees seemed to whisper secrets in the dark. My name is Mark, the guy who manned the station when everyone else was snug in their beds. I'd heard the rumors about this place, how it was haunted, how people had vanished without a trace. But I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. I thought they were just tales spun to scare gullible folks. That was until something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. The station was dead silent that night, save for the occasional hiss of the gas pumps and the distant hum of a car engine somewhere far off. My only company was the flickering neon sign and the endless stretch of black sky above. I was doing my usual rounds, making sure everything was in order, when I noticed something strange with the security cameras. They'd been glitching all evening, showing nothing but static for brief moments, before snapping back to their usual feed. I shook my head and muttered about the tech being faulty. I'd have to call the repair guy in the morning. But as I walked over to the storage room, a chill crept down my spine. The noises started faintly at first, scratching, shuffling footsteps, as if someone or something was moving around in there. My heart raced as I reached for the door handle, my breath hitching in my throat. I opened the door, and the small, dimly lit room was empty. Nothing but shelves and boxes. I tried to laugh it off, blaming the old pipes and settling noises of the building for the eerie sounds. Yet, as I turned to leave, the unmistakable feeling of being watched washed over me. I spun around, my eyes darting nervously across the darkened space. There was no one there. The night dragged on, and every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside seemed to heighten the dread in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to dismiss it all as nerves. After all, working alone in the dark for hours on end can mess with your mind. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was waiting in the darkness, and I had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute dragging on as I tried to shake the creeping unease that clung to me like a second skin. The security cameras continued their erratic behavior, flashing in and out of focus with unsettling regularity. It was as if something or someone was deliberately messing with them. I tried to convince myself it was just a technical glitch, but the growing sense of dread gnawed at my nerves. I was making my rounds, checking the gas pumps and tidying up the station, when I heard it again, the same unsettling noises from the storage room. This time, they were louder, more insistent. My heart pounded as I walked towards the door, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. I could hear what sounded like whispering, but it was too faint to make out. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. As I pushed the door open, the whispering stopped abruptly. The storage room was as empty as before, but the air was colder, heavier. I scanned the room with my flashlight, shining it over the shelves and boxes, but there was nothing there. I was about to turn away when I noticed something odd. A strange symbol scrawled on the wall behind a stack of boxes. It looked like it had been hastily drawn with a dark red substance. It was a crude, unsettling mark, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I backed out of the room quickly, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that was taking hold of me. I told myself it was just some prank, a weird joke by someone who had been in here before. But as the night wore on, I couldn't ignore the sense of unease that seemed to grow with every passing minute. The wind outside picked up, howling through the trees and rattling the windows. Felt like the station itself was breathing, alive with some malevolent presence. I tried to stay busy, organizing supplies and checking the pumps, but the whispers started again, this time louder and more distinct. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I jumped at every sound, every flicker of light. My nerves were frayed, my mind playing tricks on me. It was as if the darkness itself was closing in, pressing against the walls of the station. I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow moving too quickly to identify. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Only the darkness, stretching out like a living, breathing entity. The sense of being watched was almost unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something unseen was observing me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my anxiety mounting with every creak and groan of the old building. It was a long, terrifying night, and as dawn approached, I couldn't wait for the sun to rise and chase away the shadows that had begun to creep into my mind. It was the dead of night, when the eerie quiet was shattered by the screech of tires against the pavement. I was seated behind the counter, trying to distract myself with a mundane task, sorting through some old paperwork, when I heard the sound. The chill that raced down my spine had nothing to do with the cold air blasting through the vents. I glanced up and saw a car pull into the station. It was an old sedan with tinted windows that barely let any light through. My first instinct was to go out and see if the driver needed anything, but something about the car set me on edge. It sat there, engine idling, the darkened windows hiding whoever was inside. The car's headlights illuminated the surrounding darkness, casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. I waited, the seconds ticking by like minutes. My breath came in shallow bursts, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Finally, I gathered the courage to step outside, my flashlight shaking in my hand. As I approached the car, I could see the figure in the rearview mirror, a shadowy form with glowing eyes staring straight back at me. My heart nearly stopped. Before I could react, the car's engine roared to life, and it sped away with a screech that echoed through the empty night. I was left standing there, frozen, my flashlight flickering as if it were struggling against the oppressive darkness. My skin prickled with a cold sweat as I stumbled back into the station, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just some prank or a person with questionable intentions. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, at the gas pump where the car had been parked, were strange symbols drawn in a dark, sticky substance. It was the same kind of mark I'd seen in the storage room, but these symbols were larger and more elaborate, almost like a twisted ritualistic pattern. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone to call the police. The call wouldn't go through. The signal was dead. Fact that only added to my mounting sense of dread. I was utterly alone, surrounded by darkness that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than before. They swirled around me, a cacophony of disembodied voices that seemed to come from every direction. I could barely make out their words. The tone was unmistakable, pleading, demanding, angry. I couldn't understand what they were saying. The sheer intensity of the voices left me feeling as though I was losing my grip on reality. I backed away from the symbols, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I could still see the shadowy figure's eyes in my mind's eye, burning with an otherworldly light. The station felt more oppressive than ever, a place where shadows seemed to have substance, and every creak of the floorboards was a reminder that I was not alone. The night dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity as I waited for dawn to break. But deep down, I knew that whatever was haunting the station had no intention of letting me escape easily. The sense of impending doom was suffocating, and I was left with the chilling realization that I was entangled in something far beyond my understanding. The night seemed endless, each tick of the clock a reminder of the mounting terror that clung to me like a second skin. As dawn approached, I tried to stay alert, but the exhaustion and fear were taking their toll. I was slumped behind the counter, my eyes barely open, when something made me snap to attention. It was a sound, like a faint, agonized moan coming from the storage room. I hesitated, my hands shaking as I grabbed the flashlight and made my way towards the door. Every step felt like it took forever, the silence around me amplifying my own frantic heartbeat. The storage room, once merely unsettling, now felt like a portal to something far more sinister. I pushed the door open with a creak, and as I shone my flashlight inside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The room was bathed in a dim, unnatural light, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. In the middle of the floor stood an apparition, an eerie, translucent figure of a man, his features contorted in what looked like pain or despair. His eyes were hollow, glowing with an unsettling light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I staggered backward, my flashlight flickering as the apparition let out a silent, desperate scream. The air turned frigid, my breath misting in front of me as if the very atmosphere was infused with dread. The figure reached out towards me, his hand a ghostly extension of agony. I wanted to run, to flee from the nightmare, but my legs felt like they were glued to the spot. The apparition's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I was overwhelmed by a crushing sense of sorrow and terror. It was as if the ghost was trying to communicate something, but no words came out. Only a deafening silence that filled the room. I could feel the cold seep into my bones, a tangible chill that made it hard to think, breathe. I stumbled back out of the storage room, my mind racing. I needed answers, but where could I turn? The gas station had always been a quiet, unremarkable place. Why was it suddenly a beacon for the supernatural? My thoughts were interrupted by the sight of the cryptic symbols again. this time more clearly illuminated by the faint light of the rising sun. They seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if they were alive and waiting. I dove into the small office, rifling through old records and files that had accumulated over the years. Among them, I found old newspaper clippings about the station, reports of strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena, and an old article about a tragic accident that had taken place here decades ago. The details were sparse, but it was clear that something terrible had happened, something that had never been fully explained. The more I read, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The gas station was not just a random location. It was a site of dark history, a place where the past had not been laid to rest. The ghostly figure, the eerie symbols, the whispers, they were all connected to this place's tragic past. As the first light of dawn filtered into the station, I felt a mix of relief and dread. The immediate danger had passed, but the realization of what I had encountered was almost more frightening. The station was a haunted relic, a place where the lines between the living and the dead had been blurred. And as I prepared to leave, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was tied to this place was far from finished, and it was waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its path. The sun rose weakly over the horizon, casting long, thin rays of light through the dusty windows of the gas station. I had spent the last few hours huddled in the office, my mind racing and my nerves frayed. The ghostly encounter and the eerie symbols had left me feeling as though I was living in a nightmare that refused to end. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that the morning light had chased away the darkness. But the relief was fleeting. As I prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that the horrors of the night had left a lingering presence behind. I took one last walk through the station, determined to check every nook and cranny, hoping to find some logical explanation for the supernatural events I had witnessed. The storage room seemed even colder in the daylight, and the symbols on the gas pump had not vanished. They were still there, taunting me with their cryptic designs. The worst part was the realization that the station had a history I hadn't fully understood until now. The old newspaper clippings told a story of unexplained disappearances, odd accidents, and strange occurrences that had plagued the station for years. It was as though the place itself was cursed, drawing in unsuspecting souls and leaving them with their own share of nightmares. I decided to quit my job that morning. I couldn't bear the thought of spending another night alone in that place. As I packed up my things, I noticed the ghostly figure's eyes flashing through my memory, the eerie glow that had filled the storage room with an otherworldly light. The feeling of sorrow and despair was still fresh, and I knew that whatever had been haunting the station wasn't finished with me yet. Final blow came when I tried to leave. As I was about to step outside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A handwritten note stuck to the door of the office. The handwriting was shaky, almost as if it had been scrawled in a hurry. It read, "You can leave, but we'll never leave you." I tore the note off and stumbled out of the station, my heart pounding with fear. As I drove away, the gas station receded into the distance, but the memory of what I had experienced lingered like a dark shadow. The whispers, the apparitions, and the symbols would forever be etched in my mind. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the station is watching, waiting for the next person to step into its sinister grip. I moved far away, but every now and then I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those ghostly eyes staring back at me. The gas station remains a chilling reminder. Some places are better left undisturbed, and some horrors are never truly put to rest. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up to keep the terror coming. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring even more spine-tingling content your way. Before you go, don't forget to check out the video playing on the screen. It's packed with more unsettling tales and eerie experiences that you won't want to miss. If you have any frightening stories of your own or suggestions for future content, drop them in the comments below. Stay tuned for more haunting adventures. Until next time, sleep tight. Decant.